So good morning and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Rania Shiar. I'm project officer at the European Landowners Organization, and I will be introducing today's webinar. This is the first edition of the Soil Hour for Living Labs webinar series. And before we start, a few practical points. So this session will be recorded. The recording will be shared with all the participants and made available online after the meeting. And we will also hold a live Q&A session towards the end after the panel discussion. But please, before that, type your questions into the chat box and we will collect them and also address them during the panel if possible. And finally, just to ensure the best experience for everyone, please do not disturb the session and keep your microphone muted. And just before we move to today's program, allow me to say a word on why we are gathering here today. So the Soil Hour for Living Labs has been created as a recurring opportunity to access knowledge, tools, and practices developed in all EU soil initiatives. And this series is also intended to complement the learning activities already happening within your own networks, but also to strengthen the connections between Mission Soil within the Mission Soil community, so between the Living Labs and also other initiatives. And with that in mind, let's turn to today's speakers and program. So I'm pleased to introduce Saskia Visser, which will be moderating the panel discussion. She's a strategic partnership and opportunity development lead at Climate Kick, and myself. And we also, joining Saskia, we will have in the panel and also during the presentations, first, Javier Bravo García, a PhD in physical geography and GIS, remote sensing and environmental specialist at Evenortech, and he also participated in a lot of European projects such as Steam Bio Africa, MRV for SOC, and NovaSoil. Then we have Reindert Devlamynck. He's a research lead for energy and circular economy at INAGRO, and he coordinates for over 4 years the Living Lab on innovation in agriculture, called the INAGRO Living Lab, and it's connecting research, farmers, industry, and governments to accelerate practical innovation. And finally, we have Marc Rosiers, a senior economist and advisor at ELO and CEO of MR-FNA Consult, representing mainly SoilValues today as its coordinator, and he's also a partner of SOILL-Stepup. Thank you all for being with us today. Let me briefly walk you through so what is ahead in this first Soil Hour. We will start with a presentation from Marc on the SoilValues project and its canvas for the soil health business models, followed by Javier, who will give us, who will guide us through the NovaSoil tools for Living Labs, and then we will have Reindert that will present the INAGRO's Living Lab. And these three presentations will be followed by a panel discussion and a live Q&A, like I mentioned before, facilitated by Saskia, before we close the session together at 10. So without further delay, I will now hand over to Marc Rosiers to open our first presentation.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the Soil team for inviting SoilValues to contribute to this first edition of the 1 Hour Soil webinar series. And today I will introduce the methodology developed in SoilValues for developing soil health business models and reflect on how it can support Living Labs in creating long-term value around soil health. Next slide, please. When we hear the term business model, many people immediately think about generating revenue or making profit. Well, in SoilValues, we use a much broader interpretation. A business model describes how value is created, for whom, together with whom, and how this value can be sustained over time. That value can be economic, but it can also be social, environmental, and climate related. In short, it is societal value. You see it in the figure. Many living labs are established through Horizon Europe or national projects. These projects create knowledge, networks, and innovation. But once the project ends, an important question arises. How can the collaboration continue? How can the Living Lab continue creating value for farmers, authorities, companies, citizens, and society? And how can the improvements in soil health continue beyond the lifetime of the project? This is where business models become important, not simply as a financial instrument, but as mechanisms for organization collaboration, aligning stakeholder interests, and creating long-term impact. One important clarification before I continue. Today, I will mainly discuss business models for soil health. That is, business models that help multiple stakeholders create and capture value from healthier soils. The broader question of the business model for the Living Lab itself is, of course, closely related, and I hope we can return to it during the panel discussion. With this distinction in mind, let me introduce the methodology developed in SoilValues. Next slide, please. So how did SoilValues address this challenge? The starting point was a simple observation. There are already many excellent tools for developing business models. However, most of these tools were developed for individual organizations or companies. They rarely consider the complexity of soil health, where value is created collectively by many actors and where many of the benefits are public goods rather than private goods. So within SoilValues, we developed a methodology for developing soil health business models that explicitly takes this complexity into account. And there you see the different steps in the graph. The methodology follows 6 interconnected steps, and it starts with stakeholder mapping, identifying the actors that influence, benefit from, or contribute to improving soil health. Secondly, we analyze their needs and expectation. Third step is the SWOT analysis, helping to understand the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and barriers within the local context. And these insights then, they feed into development of the soil business model canvas, which is the core innovation of our approach. Finally, the business model canvas is translated into an implementation plan, moving from ideas towards concrete action. An important point in this methodology was not developed in theory alone. It has been applied, tested, and refined through 6 testing grounds across Europe. We use the term testing grounds because SoilValues started before the whole Living Lab approach was launched by the European Commission. And the objective was never to develop one universal business model. Rather, it was to develop a practical methodology that helps stakeholders co-create soil health business models adapted to their own regional context. In the next slides, I will briefly illustrate 2 key building blocks for this methodology. The slide is already changed, thank you. One of the defining characteristics of every Living Lab is that it brings people together. Farmers, researchers, advisors, businesses, public authorities, you name it, citizens, all they have different perspectives, different interests, and different expectations. And Living Labs are therefore excellent environments for co-creation. However, stakeholder participation alone does not automatically result in a viable soil health business model. The challenge is to translate this rich interaction into a shared understanding of who creates value, who benefits from the value, and who is willing to contribute to maintain it. And then you see it already in the shareholder matrix. This is why this matrix and shareholder analysis is the starting point for the methodology developed in SoilValues for developing soil health business models. The objective is not simply to identify the stakeholders, but to understand their respective roles. Some stakeholders possess knowledge and technical expertise. Others have decision-making power. Some are directly affected by soil degradation or soil improvement, and others may provide resources, funding, or policy support. Understanding these relationships helps identify where collaboration is strong, where barriers exist, and where opportunities can create value. The interest-influence matrix is a practical tool to support this analysis. It helps distinguish stakeholders that need to be closely involved in co-creation and from those that mainly need to be informed or consulted. For living labs, this is particularly relevant. Rather than asking who are our customers, as many traditional business models do, the first question becomes then, which stakeholders should be involved in co-creating value around soil health? And this is a fundamental shift in perspective. One of the key lessons from SoilValues is therefore that successful business models are multi-actor business models. And that is precisely why living labs are so well positioned to facilitate their development. With the stakeholders it identified and their roles understood, the next step is to translate this insight into a structured business model. And that brings me to the business model canvas. Next slide, please. The stakeholder analysis provides us with detailed understanding of the actors involved. And the next question is, how do we translate all these insights into a coherent business model? This is the purpose of the SoilValues business model canvas. The canvas builds on existing business modeling approaches, but adapts them to the specific context of soil health. I told already it's quite complex. And why was this necessary? Because improving soil health is fundamentally different from developing a business model for a single company. Healthy soil generates multiple ecosystem services, creating benefits that extend well beyond the farm. They contribute to food production, but also to water quality, biodiversity, climate resilience, landscape quality, and many other ecosystem services. And as a result, the value created is shared by many actors, and so is the responsibility for creating that, maintaining that value. The SoilValues business model canvas, therefore, introduces three important perspectives. First, soil from soil health itself becomes the starting point. The canvas explicitly considers soil characteristics, soil management practices, and the ecosystem services that they provide. Second, the canvas recognizes that the value is co-created by multiple stakeholders. Rather than focusing on single organization, it considers common needs, common goals, and shared value creation across a wider stakeholder network. Third, it looks beyond today's activities. It encourages stakeholders to define the desired long-term outcome and to develop a strategy to achieve them together. For me, this is perhaps the most important contribution of the SoilValues approach. It's not intended to produce one standard business model, as I told already. Instead, it provides a structured framework that helps stakeholders jointly explore how healthier soils can create lasting economic, environmental, and societal value within their own regional context. Next slide, please. From SoilValues to NovaSoil, so far I've presented the methodology developed in SoilValues, but this methodology helps stakeholders understand their context, identify common objective, and jointly develop their business model. But naturally, this also raises a new set of questions. Once a soil health business model has been developed, how do we assess whether it is viable? How do we compare different business model options? Which incentive mechanism may support its implementation? And how successful approaches can be scaled up? And then, of course, these questions were also addressed by NovaSoil, one of the sister projects of SoilValues under the Horizon program. And I see both projects as highly complementary. SoilValues focuses on developing soil health business models through structured co-creation processes, and NovaSoil builds on this by providing practical tools to analyze, to compare, to evaluate different business model options, and to support their implementation under different environmental, economic, and policy contexts. Together, both projects demonstrate that developing and implementing a successful business model is a journey rather than a single step. from stakeholder development to business model development to implementation, and finally to evaluation, financing, and scaling. Javier will present this after me. Next slide, please. Once we have these different tools and the model and the different tools, of course, then we come into the real life experimentation. That's we have the example today by INAGRO. And this slide brings us back to the central question of today's webinar. How can we translate knowledge into action? Developing a soil health business model is an important step, but by itself, it does not improve soil health. Real impact is created when ideas are translated into practice. In my view, three complementary ingredients are needed. First, a robust methodology. Second, a sound understanding of business cases, incentives, and implementation options. And third is a living lab that provides the real-life environment where business models, services, and innovation can be tested, evaluated, adapted, and continuously improved. Only when those three elements come together can we move from promising ideas to lasting impact. This is also where the role of living labs becomes unique. Living labs are not simply places where innovation are demonstrated. They are platforms where knowledge, stakeholders, and practical experience come together to co-create solutions, learn from implementation, and continuously improve them under real-life conditions. That's precisely why the methodology developed in SoilValues can support living labs, not by prescribing how a living lab should operate, but by providing the structured process to help living labs facilitate the development of soil health business models together with the stakeholders. And the presentation of Reindert will illustrate exactly this transition. So you have seen how a soil health business model can be developed. You will hear from Javier how different business models options can be analyzed and supported. Reindert will then show how this concept can come to life in real living lab situations. And I think the combination of methodology, tools, and practical experience is exactly what makes today's webinar so valuable. Next slide, please. Let me conclude with three messages that I hope you remember from this presentation. The first message is start with stakeholders, not with funding. The second message is think beyond individual organizations. Healthy soils generate economic, environment, climate-related, and societal value. No single actor can create or capture all of this value alone. Third, developing a business model is only the beginning. A business model needs to be translated into implementation, supported by appropriate incentives, tested in practice, and continuously improving through learning and collaboration. I'd like to finish with one final reflection. Healthy soils require viable soil health business models. Living labs can play a crucial role in facilitating their co-creation. And at the same time, living labs themselves also need a sustainable organization model to continue providing these services over time. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marc. I will now give the floor to Javier, please.
Okay, thank you, Rania. Are you sure? Okay. Okay. See me well. You see me and you heard me, right? Okay.
Yes, we do.
Okay. So thank you, Marc. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. I am Javier Bravo, the remote sensing responsible of Evenortech and the colleague of Francisco Jose Blanco, the coordinator of NovaSoil from our company, who couldn't be here today. So I am going to explain how to use the NovaSoil outputs, for living labs, and I'm going to give you share the information about the project, the links, and how to find deliverables. I'm going to talk a little bit about the business model, etc. And as you will know, NovaSoil is a Horizon project that started in 2022 and finished in October of 2025. And the main objective of this project was highlight the benefits for society and the environment from the investment in soil health. through innovative and sustainable business models. In the next slide, the core thesis of the project is if we want to improve soil health, we cannot treat it as purely technical issue, because soils are living ecosystems shaped by the economic choices of those people who manage the land. And for that reason, in NovaSoil, we treat these topics, creating information and tools for a better management. In the case of the framework, in the next slide, you have the deliverable 1.4. Here is the link to access to the Zenodo and to this deliverable, where we explain, and this is like a guideline with information about business models, indicators for soil health, incentives, mechanisms, and a lot of information around the project, around business models and soil health. Regarding to the business models co-design, the deliverable 2.2 and 2.4, and you can get more information about the business model co-design in these deliverables. Also, with the NovaSoil toolbox, another output of the NovaSoil project, where the information is in the deliverable 3.8 and 3.9, and this is like an application to optimize the selection of business models, practices, and incentives. And you have, as I said before, all the information in these deliverables, and also some videos to know how to use the NovaSoil toolbox. If you can pass the slides, 2 slides. Okay. The policy roadmaps, this is less interesting for Living Labs, but here you have some deliverables about the policy roadmaps, and importantly, the most important part is the policy labs, the specific for the choice experiments of NovaSoil. And the last thing that I wanted to highlight is in the Zenodo of NovaSoil, you can find more documents as the attached one, where, for example, one of the manuscripts that we have published is regarding to the soil health indicators, business models, incentives in Europe. It's very related to the framework, the deliverable 1.4. You can pass the 2 slides again in the next one. Okay, perfect. So moving to the specific components to NovaSoil, we have the knowledge hub, which provides a solid knowledge base and helps to define the scope of the business models. Economic diagnosis is carried out by the digital tool for analysis, where the digital super tool supports risk assessment and include optimization module, and combining these 2 small tools, we can say DTA and DST, the users can monitor and assess the performance of different business models. Next slide. In these 3 slides that I'm going to show you, I'm not going to stop very much time, but I only want to say that these 3 slides are just diagrams explaining the 3 different phases and how to use the toolbox through these diagrams. In the first one, we have the first phase, the diagnosis and exploration phase. In the second one, we have the strategic planning phase, And in the third in the third slide, the last slide about the diagram, we have the integrated implementation phase. You can pass 2 slides and another one. The tools developed in NovaSoil, such as the NovaSoil Toolbox and the Decision Super Tool, act as a bridge between scientific knowledge and practical implementation. And the main purpose of these tools is translate the general principles on soil health into operational guidance that can be used by farmers, advisors, and policymakers, for example. And one of the barriers that we can find to the adoption of soil health practices is the economic risk. And also the farmers recognize the potential this economic risk and the potential benefits, the initial investment, the time required, the uncertainty surrounding the financial returns obviously can discourage implementation of these business models. And the NovaSoil Toolbox and the other tools help assess more balanced financing models, such as hybrid payment schemes, for example, because this may combine a basic public payment, for example, through a common agricultural policy schemes, with private incentives linked to measurable and verified soil health outcomes. And of course, the tools also contribute to the design of proportionate and efficient monitoring, reporting, and verification systems. Okay, you can pass the slide. Another thing that I wanted to highlight is in NovaSoil we studied mainly these 3 business models: the public payments for ecosystem services, the carbon credit markets, and the value chain payments. And in the next slide, I highlight the third one, the value chain payments, because this one is probably the best one, the best business models for the Living Lab approach. But in the next slide, you can see the question, how to align this to Living Labs, how to align this business model. And the most important thing is they should be developed through a participatory and experimental process in which solutions are tested and adjusted under real conditions. NovaSoil incorporates this approach through co-creation processes and spaces, such as the policy innovation labs, what I mentioned before in the slide. The purpose is to identify barriers, compare different interests, and jointly design instruments that can work in practice. Living Lab also make it possible to assess not only whether a solution is technically sound, but also whether it is economically viable, socially acceptable, and compatible with user capacities. This is particularly important because soil conditions, farming systems, market structures, institutional frameworks vary considerably between regions. It's very different between the regions. In the last slide, I just wanted to highlight some links as the website, the Synodo, where you can find the different information, deliverables, data, the GeoViewer, where you can see the different use cases with the soil information data. Also, these other two links are videos that show how to use the NovaSoil toolbox and other tools from NovaSoil outputs. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Javier. I will give the floor to Reindert now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me all? I think yes. Okay. Thank you, Ranja, for organizing this, and to SOIL for having this opportunity to present the Living Lab INAGRO. So I'm Reindert, and the Living Lab INAGRO is part of the privatized NGO INAGRO, which is a West Flemish, so a Belgian research and advice institute. So an NGO, that's what I mentioned, and we are active for over 70 years now. We specifically have been executing living labs or accredited living labs for over 5 years now, and recently, actually beginning of this year, we have unified the living labs into INAGRO Living Lab. And on the next slide, I want to give you some context on my presentation today. So it is in the context of business models, and I wanted to show also a little bit the business model of the Living Lab INAGRO. And here are the building blocks. We will start off with the governance, show also quickly the infrastructure, and give you some insights in how the resources are working. I will go very quickly through the methodology because I think in Living Lab work we already been here, and now it's on the business models, of course, and it all builds on the network of stakeholders. So on the next slide, we can go to the governance. So here you have a short schematic overview, and let's start in the bottom. You have in INAGRO a lot of projects, also one-to-one business contracts, and some of them are more and some are less Living Lab approach. But what we do is we have a lot of activities where there are stakeholder interactions, where there is really we see that the Living Lab approach is checked, all the requirements there. And what we build on top of that is a structure that really brings that all together. And the structure that brings it together with the projects where we say these are Living Labs, is the Living Lab INAGRO. This is brought together with an operational team, but in the upper layer you see 5 pillars. And there, one of them is, for example, on the left, the technical advice boards. And that can be the consumer panel but with farmers. And that is specifically, we have 10 thematics, like for example, organic farming, open air vegetables, arable farming, and several other thematics where we invite 10 specifically the same farmers for a year, 2 yearly, so twice a year interaction panel where the research is discussed, where challenges are and feedback forms are filled in and challenges are identified from the farmers. We have also specific industry and policy feedback. So people assigned that are where their what their goal is to summarize all those activities, all those lessons learned from projects, from initiatives, and translate them once to industry and also to policy. Then the second goal of these people is to also get feedback and go into interaction, one-on-one with policymakers, with industry. One last pillar I wanted to highlight as well is thematic discussion groups, where we say no matter what we identified a challenge, but it's not specifically designed in advance. Every year we choose a team and we thematic, and we then select the stakeholders which are relevant. So also in that way, we have a flexible pillar as well. And this is again stick together. So that's in short how we govern the Living Lab, or I wanted to show us here the pillars. But on the next slides, I want to go to the infrastructure. Very briefly, you will see a schematic overview here of INAGRO. This goes from arable farming to aquaculture. It's very diverse. And in the infrastructure of the hosting organization, there is real life settings. For example, the anaerobic digester, it's on the right, on the bottom right. This is in the same size that would be in a dairy farm, for example. There are 60 anaerobic digesters in Flanders. Well, it's on the average of the size of these anaerobic digesters. So real life settings. Of course, not everything in the Living Lab happens here. Also a lot with stakeholders of farmers. There are 80 proefveldhouders, we call them, 80 farmers that have a yearly contract for executing a experiment. In the next slide, you will see a little bit how we have in the past defined the Living Labs. That was Agrotopia and Living Lab of Circularity. And it starts with the yellow, the grayish pictures and with the grayish contour, which are the experimental sites where, for example, tomato experiment is happening, lettuce experiment, strawberry experiment. But together, that is the lighthouse of greenhouse farming, which is also located at the hosting site of INAGRO, and it's a rooftop greenhouse actually on top of the auction of vegetables, where waste heat is also used. However, we had 2 accredited Living Labs, but we did internal check, and we saw that actually there are a lot of experimental sites that are now not being structured or governed within a Living Lab concept in INAGRO. So in the next slide, you will see a lot of extra lighthouses and experimental sites. For example, we have an organic farm of 16 hectares where everything is executed in an organic system. But there are also experimental sites that really demonstrate and co-create an experiment with agroforestry or agroecology, no-till, but also, for example, farming of the future, where we give a place for robotics, where industries can test and demonstrate and experiment with new robotic spraying systems or weeding systems. Let's go from infrastructure to the resources. And then in the resources, I wanted to show how actually INAGRO as an NGO is governed. The biggest part, 38%, comes from subsidies from projects. So really Horizon, Flemish subsidies from funding. I mean the 32%, the darker green, while the 38% is structural funding from governmental organizations, federal government, provincial government, so policy funding to INAGRO. And then you have the 17%, which is one-to-one business operating. This is, for example, testing of a new variety of wheat, and that can then be done one-on-one with the company. 13% are others, which are also services, some other structural funds. It's a diversity of smaller budgets. So what you see is it's a bit of a tripartite. There are 3 types: independent governmental funds, projects and businesses. And this is also where the hosting organization also invest in the Living Lab with structural funds. And on the next slide, you will see what that is in the resources. We structurally invest in the manager, bringing it all together, the business developer, focusing on that industry feedback. And actually, I forgot to mention also the policy interaction, which is also a person leading that. And then you have research leaders that also bring that towards the thematic discussion groups. So there are people being paid independent from the projects or from specific activities to host this Living Lab. Together, that's 4.8 full-time equivalents, while INAGRO itself, and we can, of course, use the projects, use the people of INAGRO, which are in total 240 full-time equivalents. And on the next few slides, we can just visualize a little bit methodology, because I think this is not the purpose of it, but you will see people interacting, feedback, discussion, co-creation, demonstration. On the next slide, we can focus on the network of, on the iterative approach, screening, testing, validation. You need a lot of interaction between every phase in development. So on the next slide, we can go to the network of stakeholders. This is, of course, the fundament. This is very important. And on the next slide, I can just, we can go to the following slide again. I can repeat the lesson learned from Marc, where it starts actually from the stakeholder and from the challenge of the stakeholders, and there you build the Living Lab around, not from the project. And that is also what I want to repeat here. But let's go to some concrete business models as well, some examples of services that are being executed within the Living Lab. So first off, this is very similar to, for example, a NovaSoil, to any other Horizon project, where there's multi-actor approach, where there is on-farm experimentation. One of the examples is Simone, where we use drone imaging and precision in the thematic of precision farming, where actually the farmer is doing on its field specific factors, and then we, as a research organization, evaluate, and then together with the stakeholders, we discuss the results, and in a with different discussion groups during specific times of the execution of the project. For example, before in the design of the experiment, but also during and after the experiment. Next slide. One of the specific funding is, of course, the EIP projects. I think a lot of them in Europe can be used of that. That is mostly very specific actions for soil health, like, for example, bokashi or farm compost. We demonstrate, we execute together with the farmers. There it's where it's happening. There is where the experiments are executed. Can you hear me now again? I had some problems. Yeah, my apologies. On the next slide, I want to go to a more different kind of service, which is our erosion coordinator. And here you see some end-of-pipe solution for erosion, where there is a gradient in the field and you just stop it at the end, so you prevent the good soil to be going to the, for example, waterway very closely next to the field, or on the traffic on the roads. You also see Guillaume, which is our erosion coordinator in the top right. And on the next slide, I will show you the business model of it, because there's actually two services. One is the end-of-pipe solution that you saw. And actually, this starts from 10 to 10 years ago, where there was a lot of attention to a motorcycle accident caused by a
mud stream on the roads. And from the federal government, it was very important to say, okay, we have to do something. An end-of-pipe solution is important just for safety reasons. And they allocated federal funding for solutions to that, these end-of-pipe solutions. But it is together with regional funding, and of course also the municipalities had to bring in their 10% as well from taxes, because it's mostly in specific hilly areas where, of course, these problems arise. The installation is 100% funded. But there's a second service, which is the erosion coordinator, which is facilitation between the owner of the parcel with a higher erosion risk and the municipalities and the federal government. In this way, this is, let's say, funded mostly by governmental bodies. However, of course, the execution or the end-of-pipe installation also comes together with the obligation to also do on that parcel erosion prevention measures. And that is then the investment of the farmer as well, extra time or extra compost that is added on the field. This has also in the business model canvas, you see here, it starts actually from traffic and safety and from a specific challenge there, which is that belongs to all of us. That's why there's also governmental input there. Besides, actually, there are a lot of externalities as well. For example, good soil that is lost from the farmer. And that is also what you see specifically. If I ask Guillaume, what is the lessons learned, or what do you notice? Well, mostly at the beginning, farmers lose land because of the erosion dam or something like that. They are a bit like hesitant, but when they see actually the buildup of good soil in front of that dam, they actually see now with their own eyes how many fertilizers, how many crop protection products and good soil is actually lost in a year, and what they actually gain also from there. So afterwards, they actually see how that was a no regret measure. But the problem is, it also starts actually first with a bit of a misconception on what is the value of erosion prevention. The next business model I wanted to highlight.
Reindert, can I interrupt? Sorry, but we are over time and we need to go to the panel discussion. Sorry to interrupt a little bit abruptly, but I think the business models are really fine, and I think the integration of the showing the 3 examples of from SoilValues to NovaSoil to the real in the place example to go further. Maybe Ranja, you can stop sharing the slides and highlight a little bit the three persons, because I give you the floor to some other examples, and obviously we will be sharing the different solutions. Well, I'm abruptly jumping into the panel discussion. I've already introduced, people are already introduced to the session, and basically what I hear from your 3 stories is that if we want to build a sustainable living lab, we're not building a project. Basically what we're providing as a living lab is kind of a platform that creates, demonstrates and facilitates value for not only one actor, but for a series of actors. And we do that around soil health, because we're talking about soil health living labs. Obviously, funding is very important for living labs to build their sustainable business models. And therefore, you know, if you had 1 minute to convince a policymaker or a company or an investor to support a living lab, what unique value or service would you highlight? Maybe Javier, can I start with you? You have 1 minute to highlight, because we're going to do a very fast panel. You have to unmute yourself, Javier, such that you can answer the question.
Do you hear me right now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And you, if I want to combine a policymaker, you say, right?
Yeah, if you want to convince a policymaker or an investor to support a living lab, what is the unique value that you or service that you would highlight?
Okay. From NovaSoil experience, I will highlight its ability to reduce investment and policy risk, because as you say, the living lab test solutions in real conditions, which farmers, companies, and researchers. So yeah, the ability to reduce the investment and the policy risk if I want to support a living lab.
Reducing investment cost. I think that's a real added value. I think also the example that Reindert just gave for safeguarding high rates. That's a real nice connection. People may not even recognize soil as being an investment opportunity to solve other problems. Maybe. Marc, if you have 1 minute to convince an investor or a policymaker or a company, what would you highlight?
I would stress the collective problem-solving aspect. The fact that people are put around one table in a safe environment where they can discuss very openly on potential solutions, but also reflecting on their personal expectations. I think that is one of the biggest biggest elements of strengths of a living lab approach. And I would stress it's not only in innovation that's a potential solution, but mainly in the capacity to organize its collaboration around a shared objective.
Okay, yeah, and this is also why you highlight in your shared message, start with stakeholders, do not start with the funding. I think that's a very, very interesting perspective, saying if you look to find a solution, start with stakeholders. Reindert, would that also be your message?
I think yes, but I can be complementary. This can be complementary by saying also that farming and soil is a strategic, economic, important activity for everyone, and it is under threat. So we all can do something on it, and I think that can convince businesses and government and people and farmers. Yeah, it is a very common challenge.
Okay, and I think I see here the question also, because we don't have really much time left anymore, but I think it's an interesting question from Hans, and he has already posed different questions around the whole business model. And I would also, well, again, start with Javier, like, okay, a living lab should not be 100% dependent on government funding. But still there is this social good of the social value of soils. Would you agree that we need to find inputs from different partners, and do NovaSoil support you with that?
Yeah, of course. As I say, the NovaSoil toolbox and the decision super tool, because are different things, provide operational guideline to the users and are practical instrument to everyone who wants to select, to looking for a specific business model for the living lab or any other thing specifically. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Marc, in your use cases, did you manage to get all the way to the level of blended investments, potentially from public and private, or maybe, I don't know, even other sources?
Yes, indeed, because like I told you, a living lab is not only generating when you generate healthy soils, it's not only economic value you create also other types of value which are important, and that depends, of course, on the different. That's the reason why you need different stakeholders, because every stakeholder has his own value perspective. And so if you can develop a living lab that capture all the different value, you can also generate revenue streams that will accommodate this value creation. We have, for instance, a living lab in the Netherlands, which is based on a form of citizen ownership of the land, and they put there a farmer which is working for them. So the farmer produces classical output, of course, that can be bought by the different citizens, but they also create the biodiversity, the landscape, and all those type of things, and the citizens are ready to pay a premium for that. So that means that it's not only the classical output, but it's a classical output plus a premium, because the farm generates value which is not immediately counted for in the shelves in the retailers. Okay, so that's one example that we tested in the Netherlands, but also in the city of Aarhus. It's a similar thing. But of course, on the other hand, we have also more down-to-earth testing grounds, like, for instance, the testing ground in Poland, where they developed on the basis of sugar beets, a climate-neutral sugar beet, which has also, of course, its value afterwards in the processing and other stages of this chain. So 2 examples.
Yeah, I think very, very good examples. And I really like that you also highlight, like, a lot of people always say citizens have also to invest in soil health. And I think this example that you put forward of the case of the Netherlands really shows how they can do it. So there are different ways to get investments into soils, not only public, not only the farmers, but really find a right variety, and living labs play a crucial role in getting that happening on the floor. One of the things that I also see a lot through the Q&A, and I'm sorry we'll not be able to answer all the questions, but I see there the opportunity to say, hey, we have solutions to put forward, or we're looking forward to partner on living labs. And this is basically one of the reasons why we have SOIL, because one of the things that we try to do through this webinar is to make sure that knowledge developed in other places actually comes together to be inspiration for other people's. Reindert, I believe you, when we started, you in the preparation, you also had a question like, okay, what will be the best way moving forward? Can you highlight again what was your question from your living lab, or your need from your living lab to get access to knowledge or other solutions?
I have difficulty remembering how or what, but what I wanted to maybe share as well is that, of course, we have soil and we have different kind of thematics as well, and our approach is being innovative in agro, so have a very diverse approach for so not only soil as a living lab, but see it as a agro living lab, and in that way, I think having a wider scope, and not only governmental, but trying to also have projects, one-to-one services, helps you being more flexible, being more sustainable, and because one of those challenges is also, what if the funding stops, or what if the project stops, or what if so having diverse living lab can help cover gaps and such.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I think, what I think, there is a wide availability of knowledge available, and I think the soil mission by itself already generates so much output and information that can be used in a valuable way through for the living labs. I think there is also a value in connecting living labs across Europe to learn from each other's lesson. I think the business model canvases that Marc presented and also the tools that Javier presented provide interesting insights in how do you build a business model, not only for your living lab, but also for soil health. And I think your practical examples really show that it's feasible, that it's possible, and there are many of these insights, lessons learned available. I think also there's here a concrete question from Ingrid, who's trying to build a team of stakeholders about valuing soil health. So this need to collaborate across Europe is really there. I would like to thank all three of you and then give the floor to Ranja for the final closing words of this webinar. Thanks a lot for your great contributions. Ranja.
Thank you very much, Saskia, for managing to have a panel discussion in the time available. And I indeed have some important information that can answer your question about how people can access the knowledge and continue this cross-fertilization or show their inputs or show also their solutions. I just want to take a few minutes more just to show how they can do that. So in the SOILL project, we have the Soil Hub. I don't want to repeat myself. In all projects, you have a knowledge hub, but here you also have some matchmaking and help desk solutions where you can get you can pitch your ideas, you can find experts directly and propose your solutions. And you have also a lot of other tools like thematic groups where you can discuss your proposals, where you can collaborate, and I invite you to explore it. And in the next slide, we also have some instructions on how to create an account and how to reach out to us to help you and to explain to you as well how it works. This is the slide, you can come back to it on your own time. But I was also wanting to share the next Soil Hour webinars. If you would like to join us on other thematics like the nature-based solutions, the soil monitoring law, or the soil biodiversity, we will have one in September, at the end of September, another one in October and in December. I will just leave the slide for a few seconds for people who want to scan the QR codes to start registering. And of course, for all the questions that were not addressed, you can always reach out to the speakers and follow up after this webinar. Or you can also go on the Soil Hub and try to connect with them and also ask your questions there. Okay, I'm not going to keep our participants any longer. I will switch to the rest. I also wanted to let you know that you can reach out to me or to Marc or Saskia for the next topics for our 2027 webinars. If you have any interesting thematics you would like us to collaborate on and speak about in our webinars, you can reach out to us. And finally, we will also have a Soil Hour takeaway sheet where you can find all the insights that were shared today from our speakers and from the panel discussion that you can also use or share with your some participants that could not attend today. And so thank you very much for joining us and listening to our speakers. I hope you have a wonderful day and I hope we didn't keep you for too long with us.